From 2010 to 2020, football boots have changed tremendously. And by changed, I mean they're all socks now. The very first video I made on this channel was in February of 2011. So basically for the last decade, I've been reviewing football boots. Lots of football boots. Like way too many football boots. Like just an unreasonable amount. Since that decade is now coming to an end, I thought it'd be really fun to look back at the last 10 years and pick out the 10 most important football boots of the decade. Now these aren't necessarily the best performing boots of the last decade. That could be a completely separate video altogether if enough of you guys want to see that. These are the boots that I thought were the most important in terms of their influence on the entire industry and how they affected every single football boot to come after it. And of course, these are just my picks. You might have a different opinion, and if you do, feel free to share that down below in the comments. So with that said, going from oldest to newest, here are what I believe to be the most important football boots of the last 10 years. Now I'm sort of breaking the rules on my very first pick because technically this football boot came out in October of 2009, but it was hugely influential through the first half of the decade. And that boot is the Nike CTR 360 Maestri 1. I have the elite version right here, which features the carbon fiber sole plate. But given that Iniesta scored the game-winning goal to win the 2010 World Cup wearing the Maestri 1, I figured it was fair to put it on this list. Now this is a really important and certainly influential football boot for two main reasons in my opinion. Reason number one is that it's more or less the first ever control boot, a category that is still around today, and something that more or less is partially responsible for the death of power boots, including the Adidas Predator line, which is now back, but instead of a power boot, it's now being marketed as a control boot. That's partially due to the success of the CTR 360. Also, this is a control boot that did not feature a kangaroo leather upper. Instead, it featured a synthetic material called Kangalite, which unfortunately we don't really see from the Nike brand all that much anymore, at least on their top-end models. But the idea of this synthetic material was that it was a synthetic that offered the softness and comfort and really all of the good qualities of natural kangaroo leather, but without the downsides, in that it doesn't absorb as much water, it's a little bit lighter, it's not going to overstretch, and the boots as a whole were extremely good. You can also credit the CTR 360 Maestri 3, which came out in 2013. That was the first ever boot to feature Nike ACE technology, which is not very important, but it certainly has been influential. Either way, if you're a fan of control boots, these are the boots you have to thank. Now, 2010 arguably featured the most influential football boot of the entire decade, launching just in time for the 2010 World Cup. This one from Adidas, not Nike, the F50 Adizero, which of course saw Adidas stray away from their controversial tune-it system that never really caught on and quite frankly just wasn't very good, opting for much more of a streamlined, super thin, and most importantly, ridiculously lightweight design. Now, in order to truly understand the impact of the OG F50, we have to consider what else was available in the speed category at that time, a category of football boots that had more or less been created and dominated by the Nike brand with their Mercurial series up until that point. For the 2010 World Cup, as an example, they had the fairly unexceptional Nike Mercurial Vapor 6, and then to go along with that, their flagship model where all the marketing attention went, the Nike Mercurial Superfly 2, which looking back was very uncomfortable, not a great pair of football boots, but extremely high tech. You had a Teijin synthetic upper with flywire, you had a carbon fiber sole plate, you had a movable sense stud, and all of that for the price of $400 US. For those that complain about football boots being too expensive, they used to be a lot more than they are now. Enter F50 Adizero, a football boot that weighed basically under 6 ounces in most sizes. The Superfly 2 for $400 weighing in at around 8 ounces. So these were not only significantly lighter than their competition, they were also significantly cheaper, and honestly, unlike anything else the world had ever seen. Between 2010 and 2013, it was really the only time where Nike had some actual competition in the speed boot category, with the Mercurials of that era just not being that great in comparison to the F50s. And you can make all the complaints you want about this boot. Has it aged all that well? Not necessarily. It's kind of plasticky by today's standards. But again, in comparison to what the Mercurial series had on offer at that point in time, it wasn't until basically 2013 when the Vapor 8 came out that Nike had any kind of an answer to what Adidas introduced with this super lightweight construction, all based off of their Sprint frame. Obviously something that would be hugely influential on the Adidas brand, because almost all the boots we see to this day still have some variation of this sole plate and stud pattern. So while the F50 marked the start of something new, in 2011 we got a football boot that marked the end of an entire category of football boots, the power boot category, which, believe it or not, at one point in time was one of the more popular styles of boots out there. And of course, the boot I'm talking about is the 2011 Adidas adiPower Predator. In my opinion, the last true power boot. For me, and I'm sure there's lots of people that agree with me, what made a power boot was a leather upper, a large rubberized striking element, and an aggressive stud pattern, something that the adiPower had all three of. And quite honestly, I think that this is one of, if not the best modern interpretations of a power boot ever made. The issue at the time was not necessarily that people didn't like the boot. People that were fans of the Predator series, I think, hold this as one of the best modern Predators ever made. However, due to the success of the CTR 360 series, the control boot category, and of course the speed category with the Adidas F50 line, people were trending towards boots that were lighter and thinner rather than power boots, which were heavier and bulkier. Nobody really wanted that style anymore. And what was interesting about the adiPower is that they incorporated this sprint frame-esque outsole that really gave the boot a nice lightweight construction while still maintaining all of the classic Predator elements. I think that this is one of those boots that Adidas could put out today and it would still hold its own against pretty much anything. Unfortunately, this is just not a style of boot that people wanted anymore, as good as these were. And what we ultimately saw happen with the Predator series is that it transitioned from a power boot line to a control boot line, which is when we got the Predator LZ, which wasn't a bad pair of football boots, but it wasn't really a Predator. Up next, I've picked a pair of football boots that I think a lot of people would argue has been the best football boot of the last 10 years. This one coming out in 2013, the OG Nike Hypervenom Phantom 1 that I have here in the launch orange and black. However, you'll notice when I turn it over, it has 3 studs in the heel and it's missing a stud right there. That's because this is actually a pre-production sample variation, which I just think was cooler for the video. Now, what made the Phantom 1 so special was its cleverly named Nike Skin upper, which, unlike pretty much every other synthetic boot we had seen up until that point, wasn't actually based with a plastic synthetic, but instead a honeycomb mesh with a thin polyurethane layer on top, which made for an upper that was extremely soft, very, very flexible, and had some leather-like qualities to it, more so than we had ever seen from any other non-leather upper, which a lot of people really liked. Now, the boot wasn't without its issues. A lot of the early pairs seemed to fall apart quite quickly because of how soft this material was, but due to the softness, the fit, feel, and general touch on the ball that the Phantom 1 provided is something that a lot of people simply fell in love with. They are excellent boots despite their flaws. Now, why this is important, aside from just being a really good pair of football boots, is because this showed that maybe thin synthetic plasticky materials weren't necessarily the future for football boots. This is not a knitted upper, it's more of a textile base. But as we see now, textiles and knitted uppers have pretty much taken over the industry, and this was maybe the first, certainly the most influential, to go and implement a textile upper on a pair of football boots. Now, as influential as that 2010 F50 Adizero was, there is arguably one more boot that was more influential than that, and it was the 2014 Nike Magista Obra 1, the first knitted upper and of course the first mid-cut boot all in one. This paved the way for all the sock boots that we have today. And I guess you can lump in the Superfly 4 along with the Magista because they released about a month apart, but the Magista Obra 1 technically came first, of course introducing what Nike would call Flyknit technology, which we had seen in other forms of footwear up until the Magista Obra, but this was the first time we had seen it on a football boot. We were expecting it, but I don't think many of us were expecting this mid-cut collar thing, which obviously is something that a lot of people consider when buying football boots, and that's just something that didn't exist in the industry up until this point. Now, there's so many misconceptions about what this actually does. In fact, it actually does nothing, but people love the look, some people love the feel, and some people swear that it gives them ankle support even though it doesn't. Either way, the fact that people want and or expect it on modern day football boots can all be credited to the Magista Obra 1. All these years focusing on the boots when we really should have been focusing on the socks. Now, my next pick is by far the most controversial of the 10 boots on this list, and also by far the most unsuccessful. In fact, this product I have described in the past as being a complete fail, but I do think it was very important out of all the football boots to come out in the last decade. It is the 2015 Puma evoSPEED SL, the boot that came with a warning label letting you know that they were probably going to last approximately 10 uses before you would have to replace them. Oh, and they were also $300. Which, if you're good at math, that works out to about $30 per wear, but based on my experience, they only lasted about 4 or 5 wears, so do the math on that. Just wasn't a great value for money, let's say that. Now, the idea behind the evoSPEED SL isn't really that different from the 2010 F50 Adizero, which was a huge success and a major game changer. However, Puma took that concept of making the lightest possible boot to an extreme that we had never seen before, and that this boot in a size 9, 9.5 US weighed in at about 4 ounces or 120 grams, which was significantly lighter than any football boot we had seen up until that point that was readily available to buy for the bargain of $300. The upper was paper thin, the sole plate was paper thin. This is a football boot that you put on your feet, and it really doesn't feel like you're wearing any boots at all. Now, the reason why I have the evoSPEED SL on the top 10 most important boots of the decade list is because I think it really represents where everyone thought football boots might be going and might still be going, but maybe it was just a little bit early in terms of what they were introducing to market. The boot is quite an experience to wear. Unfortunately, they're not very durable. Puma warned you about that, and people took that warning very seriously by choosing not to pay $300 for boots that would basically last 10 games if you were lucky. So it's a great pair of football boots, and I think it really pushed the boundaries of where football boots might go in the future. But the fact that we got it in 2015 in a form that I would argue is maybe a little bit unfinished because of how poor the durability is, a very risky move by Puma, but one that ultimately didn't work out. 2 years after sock boots were introduced, the popularity was only getting stronger, and Adidas noted that socks don't have laces, therefore sock boots maybe shouldn't have laces, which is how they came up with this guy right here, the Adidas ACE 16 Plus Purecontrol, the first laceless boot to come out in 2016, but not actually the first laceless boot, because Lotto did it back in 2006, 10 years earlier. Unfortunately for them, nobody cared. Now, regardless of what your opinion is on laceless technology and how good the ACE 16 Plus Purecontrol or laceless boots in general are, this is an extremely important product for the Adidas brand in terms of what it did for them, not only in terms of their current lineup of products, but in 2016, Adidas was in a bit of a crisis. You have to remember the year before, due to the lack of success with the F50 series, the 11 Pro series, the Predators, as well as the Nitro Charges at the time, they decided to completely wipe out every silo they had and reintroduce with X, Messi, and Ace. The first generations of those boots, none of them did very well at all. In fact, all of them did pretty poorly, and maybe rightfully so looking back. It wasn't until the laceless ACE 16 Plus Purecontrol that people started to realize, hey, Adidas is a brand that makes boots that we might actually want to buy. And this is one of the only football boots Adidas produced in the entire decade that sold out in pretty much every single colorway. It was extremely popular, and people loved the look and concept of a laceless sock boot. So for that reason, it has to be one of the most important football boots of the decade. Now, I have to be honest in saying that I had a hard time picking the last 3 boots on this list because between 2016 and 2020, there have been tons of fantastic football boots to release, but there is one in particular, the only limited edition boot on this entire list that I think had a huge impact on the entire industry and where Nike would go in the future with their most popular line of football boots. Of course, I'm talking about the 2017 Nike Mercurial Vapor Flyknit Ultra, the limited edition release that we only ended up getting in 4 different colorways. All, of course, sold out pretty much instantly. Hugely popular football boots, and I think more importantly, some of the best Mercurials Nike has ever made. Now, you have to keep in mind that when the Flyknit Ultra came out, the inline Mercurial models that were available were the Mercurial Vapor 11 and, of course, the Mercurial Superfly 5, both of which featured the same sole plate base found on the Flyknit Ultra. So this was kind of released as a concept Mercurial, if you will. And more specifically in the name, and a lot of people didn't take note of this, it was the Mercurial Vapor Flyknit Ultra. It wasn't just the Mercurial Flyknit Ultra, they specifically put Vapor in there. And I think the reason why is this showed Nike's future commitment to Flyknit technology and how the entire Mercurial series, not just the Superfly line, would go full Flyknit, which we would eventually see in the next generation of Mercurials to follow the Flyknit Ultra, the Vapor 11, and the Superfly 5, and of course the Superfly 6 and the Vapor 12, the first Mercurial Vapor since the Vapor 3 to not feature a Tasian synthetic upper. Instead, it had a Flyknit one, which wasn't super well received at the start, but I think eventually people caught on, and a lot of that has to do with the success of the Flyknit Ultra, which I'll go on record and still say, I think the Flyknit Ultra is better than the Vapor 12 ever was. It's not even close. This Flyknit upper, super, super soft. I love this kind of gritty texturing they had with this kind of rib design. I wish this is something they would put on a current Nike model, whether it's a Mercurial or something else. The boot is just phenomenal, and it is a shame that it was limited edition and more people didn't get a chance to try them. But in terms of its impact on arguably the most popular series of football boots in the entire world, the Flyknit Ultra has to be on this list. With knitted uppers getting more and more popular, it seemed like leather boots were more or less going to be gone in a matter of years, or at least what we had seen up until this point with leather football boots was it. There was nowhere else for any brand to go. A category of football boots that I think in the modern era has kind of been dominated by the Tiempo series. Adidas had their 11 Pro and modern Copa lines, but those had never really caught on. And what Nike was doing with the Tiempo was kind of just repeating itself year after year anyways. It didn't seem like there was much else they could do, but then in 2018, Adidas introduced this, the Adidas Copa 18-19, the Adidas Copa 19 Plus. This is a laceless kangaroo leather football boot, which combines kangaroo leather and prime knit coming together by way of fusion skin to create what is not only one of the most futuristic football boots I think you'll ever see, some people might argue they're weird looking as well, but a football boot that provided an experience that I had never felt before up until this point, and honestly proved that there was somewhere else to go for leather football boots. Think about this for a second. If you're somebody that always buys leather football boots, you do that for one specific reason, because you like the feel of leather and don't want something different. Well, unfortunately, that is not the majority of the football boot consumer base anymore. They always want something different and they always want something new, which is part of the reason why it's so difficult for any brand to maintain interest around a leather football boot, because everyone just has this expectation that it's gonna feel like every other leather football boot that came before it, which is why I think the Copa 19 Plus is so special. Which brings us to the final boot on this list, a football boot that I feel is kind of the limit of the sock boot concept, and it's actually a boot that is not that old at all. It's the Nike Mercurial Vapor 13 Elite. Currently, I would say not only the best speed boot on the market, but arguably the best speed boot of all time when it comes to objective performance. This Flyknit upper that introduces their high tenacity yarn material, which is basically like Flywire but more integrated across the entire upper, makes for a material that is thin, offering a barefoot touch, fits your foot very nicely and that it's nice and flexible, giving you that second skin sock-like level of comfort, but is also structurally sound and very responsive, holding your foot in place and really giving you this one-to-one connection with the football boot. It has an anatomic sole plate base and of course an extremely grippy stud pattern, really providing more aggressive traction than pretty much any other football boot out there right now. And of course, it's nice and light as well. It's one of those football boots that is extremely difficult to criticize, and since 2014, when knitted football boots were first introduced, it seemed like they were getting better and better and better up until about 2018, where I think they maybe plateaued a little bit. But now in 2019, with the release of the Vapor 13 Elite, and I guess honorable mention to the Superfly 7 as well, which is pretty much the exact same boot, this is one of those knitted uppers and one of those football boots where I just don't see where they go from here. It's that good. I don't want to say it's perfect, but it's as close to perfect given this concept that I think Nike can do. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to follow this up with. But as far as defining an entire generation of knitted football boots of the last decade, this is it. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave all your opinions and questions down below in the comments and I'll get an answer out to you. If you enjoyed this video, please support it with a like, and also let me know if you guys would like to see what my picks are for the top 10 best performing football boots of the decade, because I can definitely make that happen if you guys want to see it. If you guys aren't subscribed already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. You can find all of my other social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.